Welcome to episode. Oh, let me see. Okay, there we go. Welcome to episode 753 of Salsido Paranormal. Technology is wonderful when it works. Thank you for being here, and I'm here tonight with Jen, the Arcane Observer, co-host of the show, and we're going to be talking about Ed and Lorraine Warren and about their, not so much necessarily about them as people. I don't like to sort of go into just people in all that, but just what their significance in paranormal and all that, and their impact on it. As always, you can find all links to the show, as along with social media and ways to listen and ways to support the show over at the podcast the website actually, which is salsidoparanormal.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.com. And also, please check out the Trouble Minds Radio Network. You can find links to that on every episode description, where you can hear this show and all the others on the network. So I think that takes care of all of that. And again, we're going to be talking about the Warrens and their cases that they were involved in, and some of the disputes and all those. Just everything that we can cover easily anyway in a show. So, I think that covers the beginning here. And Jen, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, as always.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. The Warrens' cases are incredible. I think that they really laid the groundwork for introducing the public to the idea of ghost hunting and paranormal activity to such an extent. I mean, they literally just laid the whole framework down initially for how those investigations would go. And it seems like every investigation since then looks a lot like their early investigations, and they were really there on the ground floor. I mean, there is a lot of controversy, but if you look at their cases and the experiences they had, and their background is really interesting too. I mean, like, Ed Warren, who he was said to be, he recognized himself as a demonologist. Lorraine Warren believed that she was some type of that she was telepathic and that she was, or at least sensitive. And, they met young, and it seemed like this was their calling, and they kind of just went into it. And then they worked very closely with the Catholic Church. They had a lot of, I guess you'd call them relics, and pieces of, I've heard that they had pieces of the cross. They showed pieces of, well, I don't know if they actually had a piece of the cross, but I mean, I think that's something I read at one point. And then definitely Padre Pio, saying that there was some issue with that. I remember Lorraine Warren specifically having an affinity for Padre Pio, who experienced the stigmata. And I don't know, that always kind of loomed in the background of a lot of their research, was their the relationship they had with the Catholic Church as being some type of an authority to go and investigate these things. It was really weird timing, because had there was The Exorcist had come out, the first concepts about demonic possession, or even the concepts of the paranormal poltergeist and experiences like that. And some of the haunting experiences that they had and the investigations that they did. They investigated, the Amityville horror. Just so many different things they pop up on. And I know you have a lot of cases here that you found they're involved with, and I feel fairly familiar with all of them. Just from, I remember before they were even involved in the Conjuring movies, and the people that they were surrounded with too. They had detectives from the police departments out of New York. They had just several different individuals from all walks of life that were drawn to be around the environment that they were working in, and found their calling in the paranormal, and I guess sort of investigating why there was this interaction going on at that point in time, which I think is something for us all to think about, is why then, or had it always been going on? But it seemed as if they kind of came out of the woodworks with these paranormal experiences and this conversations with the deceased, and in the case of Ed Warren with demons. Really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think anytime you get involved in all that and you're involved in it long enough, there's going to be people that try to pick out any little detail that you might have misspoken about, or anything that they can find to make bigger than it really is, as far as whether the Warrens are involved in this case or not, or that case. Anytime you get to be big enough in a field, you're going to have people that are going to try to bring you down, to bring you down in the perception of other people, in that are interested in that subject. So, really, with everything I found here, just all the articles, and that's the thing too. This is all just like the articles I found online. Those are just articles I found online. There's no like court cases where they were convicted of this or convicted of that. There's nothing like that I could find. A lot of it was just everyone that sort of was involved with them over the years had their own views of them. And there was one case where there was someone that said that this woman that said that she was basically she lived with the Warrens and all that, and there was a lot of allegations of things going on there. But this was sort of put forward more in recent years from what I've seen, and nothing other than it being involved in court cases. As far as the profits of the movies, all that went. It's not like any criminal charges were ever, as far as I could tell, were ever brought against either of the Warrens for these sort of abuse allegations that were mentioned in recordings, but never really, again, there ended up being much more than just these recordings and these reports from someone who claimed that. And I'm not saying that these things don't happen. Obviously they do. But without, I think without a lot more sort of evidence or corroborating evidence or whatever, any kind of like other information other than the sources of those claims, it's hard to know for sure what was really happening there, if anything. So, because again, from what I saw, those claims of any kind of abuse, they happened. They were brought forward as part of money dispute, and as far as the profits went for the Conjuring series of movies by one of the either producers or directors from the first movie. So, and anytime you have money involved like that, it makes me wonder about what's really going on there, if that's the main purpose for everything involved.
Yeah, I mean, they approached Lorraine Warren for that movie. Ed had already passed away, when that had happened. And she was a woman, advanced in age at that point, and had been working in that field for so long. And when those movies were starting to come out and everything. And I just think that it was kind of a foul move to even, I don't know that, she had any intention, or even from the time period she would have come from and the experiences that they had had. I don't know, but there's something interesting about the fact that the public was prepared sort of for a sort of initiation into that realm of thought with the Warrens. The very first case of possession being claimed in a manslaughter case with Arnie Johnson involved the Warrens, where he was saying that he committed manslaughter because he was possessed. And the Warrens were intimately involved in that case. It's just really fascinating. And with Amityville, I still remember that photograph. I was really fascinated with the Amityville horror. Just the whole story about, I read the books and everything. And I remember that they were some of the first investigators to come onto the scene, because they were some of the only investigators at that point. And there was a photograph that was taken of a little boy believed to be and looked much like one of the victims in the case with the Amityville story. And I just think that, well, I mean, even the Amityville case, not the Amityville, the Annabelle case, there's so much about the Warrens that's extremely interesting. And which cases did you find in particular? Because I mean, they've literally been involved in so many that, I mean, I haven't read any. The only books I've read to deal with the Warrens, I know that Ed wrote a book on demonology. I haven't read it, but the only books that I've read that involved the Warrens were the Amityville horror books. You know, initially, the actual investigation of them, and other than that, I mean, I'd heard about the Warrens before the Conjuring movies ever came out, before they even were like a thing, but they had gained a deal of fame just because I think that the industry made use of it. You know, the industry was making use of horror movies to such an extent, and they were taking on demonic possession and haunted houses really coming into the forefront as a form of entertainment and as a type of industry. Whereas when the Warrens were coming into it, it was more to do that they were working with the church to try to, you know, some gate of hell had been opened, and for whatever reason in the early 70s, late 60s, and apparently the United States and Europe were infested again with these events, and the Warrens were there to respond to it, and that seemed to be kind of a theme that was going on. And these cases were popping up everywhere. Had they been going on the whole time? You know, most likely. But it being brought into the public forefront, they were doing that. You know, there were news agencies that were coming out. The Warrens were seen, you know, involved suddenly with all of these sort of the paranormal spectrum research, cyclical studies. They were involved in a lot of that. Especially like with Lorraine being like that she was somewhat psychic and was having these experiences while she was in the houses and would sense, you know, these different influences or whatever the case. I remember in the case of Annabelle, you know, they went to pick the doll up. And this was not from the movie, but there was a case from, I remember that Ed was talking about it. They had picked this rag doll up and they were coming back home with it. And their car stalled, like on a back, like they didn't take a main road. They actually left the main roads because they were worried that it might cause an accident. And the story sounds so far-fetched to people. But people who actually have, like, you know, when you get into the thick of this, you think of things like that, of the possibility of it. And they were very authentic with this belief in it. And so I think it was so, they were so entrenched with it, that people didn't take it seriously, or they thought that it was a little silly or extravagant. But apparently the Warrens took a side road, and their car almost like veered off the road. It stalled. They had to pull over and put holy water on this doll before they could even drive forward. And then with the museum, it began that they had the, you know, that museum of, I guess, you know, just evil objects, cursed objects, apparently curated from satanic rituals in the woods and just assaulting, you know, these objects that were haunted and caused strife for different homes that they were involved with. And that the whole museum was full of those things. And their whole premise was that they were keeping them safe there. And that's aside from the movies, you know? And then the movies, the way that they presented them were so... It was... I don't know if it was more dramatic than the actual experience. I would, you know, it's theatrical, but a lot of that stuff have been a lot more subdued in real life. But nonetheless, could have happened or been experienced in their minds, you know, about how they were experiencing these paranormal objects, or these objects that were cursed. So,
yeah,
I don't know, people are really interesting.
Sorry, yeah.
All the people around them were very interesting too. Like there were so many different individuals that were involved with their pursuit.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking at the chat here. The Matt Salas says, "I love the Warrens. I cried when they both passed." Yeah. Um, Also, Squigs in the chat. Hello, everyone in the chat there. Thank you all for being here. Mentions it seems much the same as the sudden widespread emergence of the ET phenomenon around the same time, the 60s, 70s, 80s. That's an interesting point there as well. Those two seem disconnected for so long, but then there seem to be connections over time. Matt also says they had the biggest haunted museum until Zach Baggins made his. Which, yeah, I wonder. I wonder what the figures are now on that. But the thing is, too, with those kind of haunted museums, there are more of those around than people might think, but they're just not all owned by really famous people in the field. Just want to put that out there. But yeah, with the Annabelle case in particular to me is amazing because even if anyone wanted to doubt or say that the Warrens maybe exaggerated or this or that on what they talked about with their experiences, I tend to believe that they had those experiences because other people after that also had experiences with that doll at that museum. And to the point where there was even a motorcycle crash after this young couple stopped there at the museum, and the boy sort of made fun of the doll, and they left the museum and they were on a motorcycle, and the boy lost control. The young man, I guess I should say, lost control, and he died in the accident, and only his girlfriend survived. So that's quite the coincidence if that is what that was. But if it's energy fields that are in and around objects, who's to say that they can't have effects on things going on outside of wherever they're at?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just really amazing to me. Even with I don't know if you ever, Jen, if you ever saw this documentary from years ago. It's called My Amityville Horror. I actually have it on DVD.
Yeah, I've
It's
probably seen
from
it. I'd have to see it
yeah,
again. I mean, I've literally, I mean, with the Amityville Horror, it was so. I was really interested. Same with The Exorcist, just like the actual case that was based off of. Spent a lot of time trying to understand what was going on with that, and that hatches into all of the NASA stuff because he went and worked for NASA. The boy that was involved in that, and I forget his name now. I would have been able to tell you probably 3 months ago, but I don't have it on my mind right now. I didn't read anything up before this, but one thing that I'm reminded of in particular, there was a case, there was a book written called, I think it was Mr. Entity or The Entity or something. It wasn't The Entity because there's a movie that was made called The Entity that was in California, but there was this other case. This was in California too. It was like they were calling it Mr. Entity. And this family, what had happened was they had a grandmother, and they had hired on a kind of a hospice care. And the hospice care, the woman was dying, and the hospice care woman, who was from South America, I think, I can't remember what region of South America, but she was afraid of, losing her job. So she implemented Santeria, and all these houses were on the same property. And this was a Warren's case. That's why I'm talking about it. But if I remember right, like the woman was trying to do like a healing ritual, and there were broken rosaries and candles and things of the sort. And one of the family members remembers the woman running out of the house, chased out by whatever had been conjured up. And they went into the house where the grandmother had been, and that's where they saw all of these, the symptoms of the rituals that she was doing. And after that, everything kind of just blew up. There was all kinds of poltergeist experiences. There were rooms that, nobody went into that were basically used for storage of hobby objects. And they would hear ransacking in those rooms. From there, it went to where the entity was entirely focused on one individual in the family and believed that that individual had been promised to this entity in a past life as a sacrifice. It demanded to be called the Prince. Just Prince, basically. And it wrote on mirrors, and it produced a spear, a literal spear that they took to be studied, and it was involved in some type of, like, some sort of rituals down in South America used for blood sacrifice, and it just appeared in their house. And they reported things like stones being thrown at them when they were outside. The entity was able to produce objects. Like, one time it stole a wallet from someone and left it in the house. It produced like these giant boulders that the family had seen when they were out on kind of a vacation. And it was called, they had brought out all kinds of people. And I think Rosemary Ellen Guiley was even called out on this case. And the Warrens were called out on this case. And they brought out shamans, and the shamans at one point were like burning sage. The entity was up in the attic, so they reported. And I remember that they said that they were blowing this smoke up into the attic, and they could see that all the insulation up in the attic began to shape up into looking like this horned, like the horns turned downwards and underneath. They could like see it forming and in the smoke, and it was blowing the smoke back down and laughing at them. And the Warrens, and there was another case where a woman came in and she was doing like egg rituals where you put eggs around the house. And the entity was so strong, so they say, that it was throwing these eggs and laughing at the woman. It was like this full manifestation, and it was supposedly linked to some type of monastery. That it talked about having walked with the monks in some monastery. And it was this very literal entity, and it ended up going with a family friend and staying, basically haunting this family friend of theirs. And I can't remember, the book is called, I think it's Mistress Entity or something of the kind. Nevertheless, the Warrens were involved in that, and they had been called out to that case by a priest, and something had happened and they weren't allowed into the house. And then I can't remember the witch. I think it was Rosemary Ellen Guiley, if I'm not mistaken. But she said she did this ritual, and by the end of the day or the next morning, they would know who had put this, who was involved in this. And it was this whole extravagant story. But the Warrens in that case were linked into it. And there were these other individuals that were also in the paranormal field that were linked into it. But they were not able to be effective in that case because the actual family would not let them into the house, which is just really interesting.
Yeah, I found that documentary. That is amazing. I had never heard about that case. The main ones that I found that were mentioned in the articles a lot were, of course, Amityville, Annabelle, and then the Perron family house, the one that was the original Conjuring movie that was like the inspiration for that. But this My Amityville Horror movie documentary, it's about, there was two boys, the two sons and one daughter, and this is all about one of the sons, Danny, who made this documentary decades later, of course, about his experiences. And he talks about how his father was, at least if not even father, was his stepfather, I guess, because they had the parents, they got married after there was a father. His father was not George Lutz. The wife had been married before, so I can't talk. Anyway, and so Danny was saying that he remembered seeing books about paranormal things, occult things, rituals, and things like that, and at the house in Amityville, and I forget the details, but he said that George Lutz used to talk about and even perform different ceremonies and things and rituals and things. So it's really wild that, I mean, how much was already at that house because of the whole Ronnie DeFeo murder of the family, which there's all kinds of weirdness around that. But then how much was brought in by the family themselves, the new family themselves, with whatever the father was possibly doing. And again, this is from this one documentary, so I don't know how accurate everything is, but I saw that this documentary was the first time I really saw Lorraine Warren, not a movie version of her, but her actually in this documentary. And I believe she did have a piece of the cross in that documentary, but I don't know. Unless like everyone was faking, which I kind of doubt. That documentary to me says that there was something going on in the house, and just because other families didn't have anything happening in the house when they moved in later on, to me that doesn't automatically rule out that there could have been things going on in the house at the time for the Lutz family that was there, because there's just so many reports of that. And even if they did exaggerate or whatever when the book was made, again, I don't think everything is as simple as it was all a hoax or it was all real. I think there can be, different layers to everything. So, but yeah, it was Amityville, Annabelle, and then the other one was that murder case that you mentioned with the and I forget the names now, where that the defense in the case was
Arnie Johnson.
There we go. Yeah. To where the defense was literally that the devil made him do it. So, yeah, but go ahead with that, whatever you have on that.
Well, with the Amityville case, it's been so long now because I spent a long time where I was really fascinated about it, and that was years ago now. And then they did make the first movie, but I didn't watch any of the other movies that followed up with it or anything. But the books about the Lutz family,
right?
I remember, the father, the way that he accounted it was, it began sort of like with the daughter, and like one of the very first instances that really stands out in my mind is that she began seeing this pig, and she had named the pig, and I can't remember what she named it, but gosh, I can't remember what the name of. But anyway, she would see this pig outside the window, and it was sort of like a friendly experience going on, and from there, it just sort of escalated. I can't remember what she used to call it. I can almost hear it in my mind, but I can't remember what the name of it was because she even had a name for this pig. And what's really bizarre is that, the original story of the family that was there with the DeFeo family, there was something to do with, indigenous peoples and perhaps like a burial ground of some kind. And one of the forms of, which is really odd, but one of the forms of, I guess what you'd say, not execution, but sort of a punishment, was to cut the noses off of the enemies, where they would literally, it would look something like that. And there have been photographs of other people have taken in the paranormal field where it does look this way. But the concept of the pig thing is terrifying. I think she called it, gosh, I can't, it's like I can almost remember, you know what I mean? If I looked at the book, I had the book a couple of times, but just, it started out with that, of course, with the children. A lot of the furniture had been left over from the DeFeo family. I recall that too. They had gotten a really good deal on this house. And I remember that some of the beds and stuff were left over from the previous family, and some of the furniture was, which I think is just incredibly creepy in and of itself. And it's really interesting to note that the families that moved in after that said that besides the presence of people coming because of the fame of the house, they didn't experience a lot of paranormal. But what's really weird about Amityville and in general, if you look at the town of Amityville, there were other cases besides that particular case that were going on of paranormal experiences that were happening in that town as a whole. And there was this whole thing about across the lake where that house was located, and there was like a dock, of course, where they had the boathouse and so on and so forth. But across that lake, there was some sort of I can't remember all the details of it, but there was something like there were rituals going on over there, rumored in that town anyway. So the town itself had sort of a preliminary layer of that property and that town itself being somewhat maybe cursed and at least enhanced because some people in that location were aware of its history, of the land's history, and were there doing a lot of, I guess you'd say, rituals of some kind. So
Yeah,
there
we
was
will.
something to that extent.
Yeah, we will have to dig into each of these, I think, in separate shows in the future here, the Amityville, and not just that the one house, but the whole town, like you were talking about. I'm really curious about that now.
Hmm.
But also, I mean, like every one of their major cases, I think we could do a show on.
Oh,
And
for
that's the
sure.
thing about that, that there's just so much there to go into. And you are right about the number of people that they've. I remember hearing different shows about them over the years, and they were always in contact with people who were also investigating things, and they were just really looking into everything that any kind of experiences that were being had across a wide area, that whole sort of New England area. And so yeah, that's something now with the let's see here. I don't remember where I want to go with this. But yeah, so that documentary, I definitely recommend that My Amityville Horror, because again, it seemed pretty genuine to me as far as um, the 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 former now adult, but that he was a child at the time. The child's experiences, and he it still haunts him today, even um, at least as of that documentary. So, but there's this the case again that this the devil made me do it case. It's the true crime case of Arnie Cheyenne Johnson, who tried to again get through or get off the hook for murder by saying the devil made him do it. Uh, so and I remember a couple of the articles I found mentioned that the Warrens actually did go into the courtroom and tried to help with that argument, presenting their own sort of evidence or whatever you want to call it as possible evidence of this.
Yeah.
So that's really amazing that was even brought up.
Yeah, even the concept of this, I think, must have horrified the mind, in, at least in America. You don't know how far reaching it was that it went, over into the UK or anywhere there. But, they were loosely involved in the Enfield poltergeist. So they were, very loosely, but the initial Enfield was, this huge story about basically a man had died in an armchair, and this family that lived in this kind of a townhouse. A girl
Mm.
began she would speak in the same tone, and it was all to be like eventually, said to be like a hoax, but there were witnesses within the police department or what, the constables and things like that. It was really interesting. But, in general, it looks like they kind of, just the whole concept about even the idea with Arnie Johnson, that a person could become possessed and commit these kinds of crimes, opened the mind of, in the United States, I think, to the concept of that. That hadn't really been previously thought of, like, well, they must not even be human, they're under the influence of diabolical forces that they may, and then with the weird thing about the Warrens was that they introduced, you know, uh, basically just like this information that supported that concept because they had these paranormal, table shakings and, again, with, just unseen forces at work and the paranormal aspect that led up to what appeared to just be insanity. But even the idea, it goes back in time to where they were even considering that people in insane asylums, maybe they were affected by the unseen world in some way. Or maybe schizophrenic people are not schizophrenic and they're seeing into some other realm. It was just like they kind of tapped into a lot of that. It did this whole initiatory interpretation of the paranormal, the crime in the United States, the motivations, and it really brought it to the forefront. The Warrens played an intricate role in that, and that along with the church, in my opinion. It's almost like that was really bizarre because Padre Pio, came under fire as possibly he was falsifying that he had this was a saint, that a modern day saint, you could say, that experienced stigmata and had his hands wrapped and so on and so forth. And that was one of the big saints that they talked about most often that I heard about was Padre Pio. And it's just really interesting that they even brought that to the forefront, sort of, at that time. And the whole idea of, like, with The Exorcist. Now, that was all laid groundwork. But then you had The Exorcist come out. And the way that the public reacted to that was tremendous. Now, they were not involved in The Exorcist case, as far as I'm aware. I'll look real quick. But I don't think that was an early case that was happening. And that was mostly just dealt with by priests. Initially by Protestant priests that then turned it over to the Catholic Church to some extent. So there was it was Lutherans and Catholics that were kind of battling the supposed demon in St. Louis within this boy. But the initial case had started up in this little town in New England. And the whole thing circling around New England, there's a lot of premise about that there could have been, whenever the Pilgrims came over, the Calvinist movement that, not to go into all of that, but that there was this sort of, I guess you would call it like a old belief sort of circulating there. Not just in witchcraft, but like something like sinister, cloaked in Christianity that was coming into the United States at that time. Into the United States of America at that time. And the instigations of many of the witch persecutions and things like that, that it was just this sort of whole interesting thing going on, in New England at that time. So it's not surprising that they had so many different experiences. But the United States is just a very strange country. And the way that we interpret all these things, we've created our own lore about how we interpret the paranormal. And I think the Warrens played a big part of that. They actually kind of showed, and the film industry did. But, with the Warrens themselves, the way they were approaching this and bringing all these old ideas to the forefront, when they did, like, the timing was really interesting with them. They had the moon landing, and we had all of that going on, and then here come the Warrens, and they're with the church, and there's some kind of diabolical infestation in the West. And they were at the forefront of that,
Right. Yeah, so the big ones that I've been seeing here is really Annabelle, and then Amityville, and then the Conjuring incident there. So, and that is, of course, the situation with the Perrin family. And this was a mother and father and 5 daughters. That's quite the good-sized family there. That's also, if you think about that, that's a lot of kids in one place at one time. And the way that we know that there's so many reports of kids having paranormal experiences just in general anyway. But so in January of 1971, the family bought this farmhouse in Harrisonville, Rhode Island, and they started having weird experiences happening right away, and got more intense over time. So yeah, there's really just a lot of stuff there, and I think even beyond the Warrens, I think that no matter what happens with, even if their names are sort of, if they do eventually get sort of forgotten over time, at least by most people, I don't see the horror movie industry leaving their work alone anytime soon. I think that's going to keep on going for a long time. And whatever cases that the movies can link up through fiction, they will. And so it's just amazing how, again, this one couple has is just making such a huge influence, having such a huge influence even till today, on all of this, all the things we talk about. And so, and yet, like I said, because of different allegations and stuff like that, that as far as I've found, I haven't found anything confirming them. They're just such a there's some shows I mentioned this a little while back that won't even won't even mention them, or if they do, they'll just mention them as their names, and then that's it. And I think that's a mistake to do that without sort of mentioning the things that they have done, and then mentioning the reasons why. If you're not going to cover someone, at least mention why you're not going to do that, because at least that way people know and can do their own research. And that's my opinion on that in general.
Well, yeah, it's good to have, just an open perspective about it, I mean, but, thinking about Ed Warren, who, he called himself a demonologist, and thinking about this was pre, he would not have grown up on the same type of horror movies that that our generations have. And
Right.
would not have access to the books that we have access to. These would have been like none of the new stuff that's come out about demons or demonology or any of that, or about were these truly the spirits in limbo, so on and so forth, and what are the fine lines about it, as they were Catholic, the whole concept that they were dealing in, and the sort of this mirror effect of good versus evil going on, and that they were conversing with diabolical forces, basically, and that Lorraine Warren was in tune with, in a telepathic form, from this religiosity. She was interpreting these experiences through that lens. But like I say, not the internet, not television as we have it today.
Oh, definitely.
Just sort of coming off the raw with that. And then having this interpretation of those experiences and how they were seeing it. And that there has to be sort of a give and take about how we're going to interpret it, because we have to take into context the background of these individuals, the time frame they were growing up in the 50s, and what they would have been experiencing in their youth and what the world was like. And it's just really incredible. I haven't read any of Ed's books, but he would do a lot of, the premise of the way that he would approach a lot of the investigations, if you watch, like, people who will watch them, in the actual footage, which is not a lot. There isn't a lot, to go off of,
Yeah.
but just so grassroots about the approach. And then, the bravery, too, in the face of these sorts of things. And I've heard accounts in, like, diaries of priests, like in the case of The Exorcist, where they report these, in the case of The Exorcist, these priests who were just running these, typical ministries, I guess, at the time. At the time this was happening. And then the families that are involved, like in the case with The Exorcist, that, and I don't know, I shouldn't be bringing up The Exorcist because they weren't involved in it whatsoever, but just how that movie really affected, that there was something going on, at that time period with the American public, and the Warrens were the answer to that, in a way of like, what is going on? And the Warrens had an answer. That this was what was
Yeah.
going on with it to some extent, is
No,
what it
that's
feels like.
that's a great point. Yeah, that's with everything that they did. It does amaze me, like you were saying earlier, the connections that they had to. I really wonder what kind of how many did they have those connections to the churches because they were already friends with the different priests and all that you know they worked with, or did that come about because of what they were investigating, and then they had to go to the different priests to take things further. I also wonder too about, and I don't know how much this has been looked into at that point or not, but over time I've heard a lot about like different shows and things where different people within the religious community or people that have worked with them have said that not all cases of even poltergeist activity, but not all cases are necessarily an evil being entity. It's more um, sort of mental health issues, and but people can still generate energy on their own. And to me, it's amazing that there's this whole idea of going through processes to verify or to figure out, is it this person that's doing all this, or is it some other being that's attached to them? And I think that a lot of that investigation into those things started off with the Warrens and figuring helping priests and all that figure out, which cases did involve other beings and which ones didn't. And I think that's something that now is, it's it's looked into a lot more. You hear about that where not all not all reported cases of possession are necessarily possession by another being. It's a more of a mental illness thing, which is terrible that this is happening. But in those cases, the church doesn't get involved in the same way. They work with the medical community to try to work through things. And
Yeah, there have to be these, they have these definitive guidelines
right,
they would go by. There was a sort of, way that it comes across is that almost no cases are interpreted by the church. A long time
yeah,
ago, every case was. But as it's developed, it's become more of like is there some type of psychological imbalance? Is there some exposure? There was and finding these authentic cases of demonic possession, for example, and the church being involved in that. It was, it's, well, I mean, did they have access to multiple different languages? Were they able to do that? Were there instances of where objects were moving around? And in some cases, these were refrigerators,
yes,
sofas, things like that were moving around in the property. And then having information that they couldn't possibly know in cases of aport, where an object will appear in a location without any explanation whatsoever. Like there was one case it was the Enfield case, the Enfield poltergeist. And apparently, a doctor had gone to that location and his entire doctor's bag went missing. And it appeared on the roof of the neighbor's house. This was a townhouse sort of setup. And
right,
just stuff like that would have to pass par. It wouldn't just have to do with like psychological imbalances. So it was progressive. It was progressive from the time where they considered epilepsy or any type of psychological imbalances to be the influence of diabolical forces. So the Warrens and the time that we were looking at in the United States, anyway, the interpretation of this was those are the old days. We put them behind us of torturing the insane and those who are disenfranchised. And it went beyond that into where they have knowledge of languages they shouldn't have, access to. There's no way that they would know Aramaic, for example, or there's no way that they would be able to like defy natural laws and levitate and things like that. Though we've heard about that in many different cases what's really interesting about that is that it's not just diabolical. I'm talking a lot, so my throat's getting dry. It's not just cases of diabolical influences that cause people to levitate. There are the levitating saints. So we've talked about that a little bit before. And I've always thought that was really fascinating. But with the Warrens, there was sort of this progressive attitude. It wasn't all the devil. In some cases, it
Right.
wasn't, it was not just, and it wasn't just, and sometimes it wasn't psychological imbalance either, that they were always leaving that door open to these sort of
Yeah.
old concepts about this. And though the future, like people were going towards the future, they weren't going to leave that behind, that there was some trope occurring amongst normal American families where there was, for some reason, these paranormal experiences. And were they simply the dead, or was it to do with intelligent entities that were literally inhuman intelligences at work? So they kind
Right.
of left that rock, that boulder, right in the middle of American society as they were conceiving of all of these ideas that were coming through the news media, through television and movies at that time, where they were really making an impact. And they're still doing it, as you were saying. And people are still looking through that lens and, moving forward with the American public, at least the perceptions in the West, which, I mean, if you look at the East, they're, I think it appears from a Western view that they are a lot more, I guess, congruent with these entities existing, and that the West has a sort of schism with their interpretation of it, and they want everything to do with mental illness,
Right.
and that there is something to do with that, but it's hard to explain away. Um, it's going a little deeper into the idea that the human psyche could produce these sort of phenomenon from a place of some sort of untapped human potential that is turned in sort of to a shadow aspect that looks evil and diabolical when exposed. Or are there these ancient forces at work that are inhuman, that are not actually, but isn't that exactly what we kind of consider to be the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the shadow itself? Is it an entity unto itself? And how does it perceive itself? But I mean, from a psychological perspective, could we possibly know at some level within our deep psyche all of these ancient languages, or could we also tap into having, I guess, what you could call these sort of paranormal powers, and under the influence of being possessed by the shadow? But that was not really so much what the words were talking about, but that's where the West is going with it. But
Oh
isn't
yeah.
that that's kind of the message all along? That's kind of been the message all along. It's just not been the way that the general public has interpreted it. So it's
Well,
just
even
really interesting.
yeah, even with the Warrens, like I know from what I've heard over the years, um, from people that are even aware of them a little bit, they're more aware of the cases where, I mean, they're thought of as being strictly uh, demonologist. They're thought of strictly as dealing with all the negative forces, but that's not the case. They dealt with, again, other poltergeists. They dealt with just regular hauntings. It's just that the media doesn't have as much use for mundane kind of not the experiences that they can't sensationalize. They have no use for those experiences if they can't really ramp things up and have everything, again, the whole idea with even just regular news. If it bleeds, it leads. You know, um, that's what so much of paranormal entertainment over the years has become. It has to be all evil. It has to be all demons or very evil ghosts or spirits, and which is partly why I started the show, because obviously I don't think that's completely the case. So, but yeah, they're definitely they're they become associated more with that than just the work that they actually all the other work that they actually did, and they weren't just they didn't just do investigations either. That's the thing. I didn't think about this until now. I know they did lectures and everything on these topics, and I would love to actually hear some of those. I'll have to see if I can find some of those and maybe put them in the episode description if there's
They're
any
really
recordings.
hard to find
Yeah.
because
I,
I've looked for them too, and they are very hard to find. Back to what you were saying, as far as the negative aspect of it, people playing a key role in developing, these the fact that humanity may have some sort of psychic powers, or that they may have some powers of will, especially in a group. Churches being essentially the same concept, or even just group mind, and the access of the media trying to control what the group mind will think. With The Exorcist, the movie, of course, it's a far cry from the actual story of what happened. But the fact that the boy went on to work for NASA, and what we've talked about before with NASA, and we'll have to go into that in some other show again,
yeah.
but because it's worth revisiting. But just that, he went on to become this, scientist who developed some of the this, that, or the other to be able to get through the tremendous heat of going up through the upper atmospheres, and that things wouldn't melt and all these different things, and it had to do with the moon landing, and there was like a lot of that he was involved with. But just really interesting that that's where he would play a role in it, and that the hospital that he was going through some of these exorcisms, or at least some of the, I guess, the sufferings of his experience of being supposedly possessed, they've been torn down and things like that. So there's like not necessarily a cover up, but there's just something very interesting about that humanity itself, at least in the West, in the society and governments and things, being involved in these certain types of rituals, and then involving the public in it, which is exactly what I think those people had these very visceral reactions to watching that film. And even with the Amityville and all of that early horror, which, I mean, they've tried very hard to like replicate it, and sometimes they can, but the level and the level on the mind from those films was tremendous on the American public, I think, and on the public of the world at large. Just what was coming out of the United States at that time through films, books, and yes, the Warrens. The way that they were interpreting those things to the United States, to the public in general, as seeming to be, these sort of. It is an incredible topic. They were extremely, fascinating, and you cannot ignore it, that they were, the role that they play in this field. No way.
Yeah. And like I said, to me, the evidence that they were, at least with most of their cases, actually investigating real things is there have been other people who have been involved who have had experiences during or even after the Warrens stopped being involved. They still had experiences after as well in those places or with those objects. So to me, that says there's more going on. There's too much going on there for it all to be faked or exaggerated. I do definitely think we should do a show at some point on Amityville, as well as maybe the Exorcist thing. I do think we should do a show, as you mentioned, the whole occult connections between the paranormal and just NASA and government agencies and all that at some point as well. I think that'd be a good thing to do. Also, I think we should do a show on. I don't think we've done this yet, on just the idea of, or the accounts of, and I tried looking into this a while ago, and I couldn't find a lot on it, but the idea of levitation, of telekinesis, of all those things, because they are common in not just like you said, like we were saying here, not just with when it comes to any kind of outside influence of whether it's nefarious, diabolical purposes or entities, but also just poltergeist activities, and then just people who have been able to manipulate things, objects somehow over time, even with electronics and things like that. I think maybe a show on sort of the mind and the powers that can possibly be connected to it might be a good thing to
Yeah.
do at some point as well.
Yep, that's a great idea. I'll be looking
Yeah.
forward to that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. Unless you have anything else you really wanted to cover.
No, I mean, I think that we can always cover more in a future show, and I really enjoyed being here and I loved talking about this. You know, I hadn't thought about it in a long time, and when you brought it up, it was just perfect timing. Yeah, but yes, I think going forward and talking about any and all of what you just mentioned, the connections of the paranormal with the United States government, or just the governments of the world at large, and then in
Yeah.
general, for sure, about the powers untapped in the human mind and how that is both seen in the negative aspects, but also in the positive aspects too, and how controversial that can be, throughout time. And then, yeah, I look forward to it. And thank you for having me, James.
Oh, no problem. And then, yeah, we'll definitely we'll go into a deep dive on the Amityville case and maybe
Oh yeah,
the Perrin, the Conjuring case, and all those. We'll do those shows as well.
yeah,
And
for sure.
yeah, so thank you again for being here, Jen. And I will talk to you again soon.
Talk to you soon. Have a good night. Thank you.
You as well. Thank you. Yeah, and everyone, thank you for being here. Had quite a big crowd tonight, so I appreciate that. And that's going to do it for tonight. Reminder for anyone that's listening live, the next Patreon show, next Trick or Treat Patreon show will be next weekend, April 5th, I believe it is, that Saturday, the first Saturday of April. And that'll be after our usual Saturday shows that we record. And then, yeah, so that'll be a fun, next weekend will be fun. And thank you all for listening. And I will talk to you all. Let me get to where I have to stop the recording, and then we'll do that. But yeah, so everything looks set. All right. So yeah, thank you all for being here, and I will talk to you all next time on Salsido Paranormal. Take care.